just a pulse oscillator, and you know, pulse oscillator with a low-pass filter and amplitude control. The simplest possible synthesizer you can create. And I take it most people are here familiar with basic analog synthesis and stuff. Yeah. But in this case, I'm controlling with the pressure of my finger simultaneously the volume and filter frequency. And this would be where, for example, something like Ableton Push would stop. Then after that, I've got left-right back motion for pitch. And then I've also got timbre in this direction, which in this case is a pulse width modulation. So that's closer to 50% duty cycle, closer to 90% duty cycle. And so here's some other sounds on that. Here's, by the way, this is just a MIDI controller. It's just putting out standard MIDI data. In this case, it's over USB. And by the way, this is all USB bus powered. So I'm just putting out MIDI data, and right now it's playing into Logic Pro X, which has so many nice synths in it that it's a very nice match for an instrument. So here's Sculpture, kind of a poor but reasonable cello sound. I've got it hooked up to a sustain pedal that accepts a dual foot pedal, and I've got it down the phone here. So here's a clean electric guitar, sort of a Strat sound. And then here's something I'll put together, that I put together, which is, I split the keyboard into two portions, and I've got on this side, did anybody see the Mode Fest video I did? Okay, that's one, yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah. Most people do. They see the first 30 seconds, then makes it decent. But this is the same sort of thing I did on the Mode Fest one, and I really haven't worked that much of a demo yet, but at least it shows the abilities of what you can do in playing two sounds at once. So on this sound, I've got that same sort of just a pulse width oscillator, pulse oscillator and filter, but it's going through a plugin I make called Adrenaline Sync. That's sort of beat synced effects. In this case, it's actually doing a different pulse of a phase shifter filter on every pulse you're hearing. And on this case, I've got an FM sound that is going through guitar-like distortion that's in another instance of Adrenaline Sync, the same plugin. And so I'll just play a little bit of this. Expressive wind or bowed instrument, you don't really have to do a lot to create something of beauty. And that's what I'm trying to create with this, is basically an interface that allows people to develop gestures in the same way that when I was a kid I loved the gestures that Eric Clapton would do on guitar, or Jeff Beck, or Jimi Hendrix, or whoever it was, but they were all playing the same instrument. And today it's difficult for me to tell who's playing a synth on a MIDI keyboard from their personal style, because there's not a lot in the way of personal gestures. You know, at first, for example, Jan Hammer, when he played Minimo, you could recognize his gestures, and then everybody kind of figured out pretty quickly that the pitch wheel and the mod wheels weren't really all that useful. And so I think he stopped practicing on it. And a lot of people just didn't really pick it up. I remember Chick Corea used to use an ARP Odyssey, and I saw him in concert once, and there was this knob with a sort of a center dead spot intended, and he was the whole time in concert looking to find out if it was in the center dead spot. You know? But you know, it's hard to create a gestural interface that really is useful and is something that people will use and embrace enough to be able to develop gestures on it. And then my hope and dream is that this will be compelling enough to people that will actually practice and develop their own style as a LinnStrument player. You know, so. Let's see, what I can tell you, you're probably wondering, what are those crazy lights doing? Well, they're basically training wheels. It's telling me where the naturals are. Let me select another sound here. So, in this case, the blue notes are the C within each octave, and the green notes are just the rest of the naturals. So, each one of these rows is a chromatic. And then the chromatics in this case, I prefer offsets of all fours, kind of like the low four strings of a guitar. But you can tune it like a guitar, and you can tune it like, my wife plays cello, so she likes to tune it like a cello, all tuned in fifths. And it really depends on your preference, right? But the interesting thing is, I find it actually very easy to play, because if I want to do a scale, and of course it's isometric, so I can play that anywhere I want. But I used to accompany a friend of mine in the Bay Area who was a songwriter, singer on guitar, and he would often choose these horrible keys for guitar players, like E flat or D flat. and you know, I'd have to change where I was, but the dots in the guitar would stay in the same place. And it's nice to actually have these training wheels, which you can adjust. You can move the lights around or do transpositions and such. I actually find it very useful. Then just to give you an idea of what some of these buttons do, this selects the preset. It's just basically putting out a MIDI program change. This turns the volume up and down for you just a bit. This one here just sets, for the left split, your octaves. I can see the latest software, I think I broke something. And for the right split, the octave. This one here allows you to set the output transposition just like you would on any transpose knob on a MIDI keyboard. And this one here transposes the lights and the pitch as well. So for example, right now the C in this octave is one step from the end. Let's just move it so it's right at the end, or all the way down here so it's right in this corner. And it helps because, you know, the keyboard is 25 columns of 8 rows, and so it's basically 2 octaves, like C to C to C. And then there's a couple of switches here, just programmable switches, switch 1 and switch 2. I figured those are good names for them. And those, along with the 2 foot switches, can be assigned to a number of different functions. Like right now, it's just a sustain pedal. Oh, by the way, it's just completely continuous. And then over here is the split, and you can change the split point. It's kind of flashy still, but that allows you to just feel like any split keyboard. But these top and bottom buttons are basically all the settings, and it's hard to see, but there's a number of settings printed here and printed here at this side. And what those basically do is these are the settings that are unique for each of the 2 splits. So I've got things like MIDI channel, MIDI mode, whether it's all on one channel, whether it's one channel for every note you play, whether it's, there are 3 different modes, just to let you know about that. If you really want independent pitch bend and timbral control for every note you play, then the only way to do that in MIDI is to have one channel for every note you play. And fortunately, Logic Pro X accepts that mode, one of the few DAWs that does. There are a number of others, but not as universally as Logic Pro X does, which is very nice. Ironically, in order to get that polyphonic mode, you have to select something called MIDI mono mode. Why? I don't know. And you can make them independent for each split. And a number of things you can turn. For example, you can select whether you're sending continuous X, Y, and Z, or any of the above, any combination of the above. For example, if you're going to focus on just pressure, you can turn off X and Y and turn it into enables and push. Or you can, if you want to focus just on pitch bend, then you send the X axis as well. And so those are unique per split. And then over here, you've got a number of other settings. This allows you to turn on or off any of the lights within the octave. And right now, I have to set to do the naturals, but I could set it to indicate any scale. And actually, what's interesting is at first I thought it would be better to have the ability to just play instead of chromatics, select any scale you want to play chromatically. But after a while, and actually people found the same thing, they found that they like the idea of the lights telling them where the scale that they've chosen is, but also having the naturals in between. I mean, excuse me, the accidentals in between. So it works out as a great way to be able to select any scale effectively, because you just are essentially just not selecting a specific scale, but rather just saying, I want the lights on or off for this particular note, So there's that stuff. There's a bunch of other stuff in there too, a lot of settings that you normally have. And let's see, I actually have some, oops, not that, some notes here. Does anybody have any questions right off the bat?
What's isometric?
Oh, sorry. That's it's an exercise that you hold your hands. Isometric basically just means let's say isometric. I say isomorphic.
Oh, isomorphic.
Yeah.
Isomorphic.
That's why I said that's
Isometric is exercise.
Isomorphic is a term they give to instruments where the same hand gestures, the shape of your fingers, can just be moved around in order to transpose to different keys. For example, on a piano, it's great for playing all the white keys. But if you want to, somebody says, can you play that in C sharp? It's much harder, of course, because you have to learn a different fingering for a given chord or scale for each of the 12 keys. So what started out to be intending to be a very simple instrument to play actually becomes far more difficult. And that's why great jazz players are so amazing. They can actually play chords and melody and keep track of all these 12 different fingerings they've learned over many years. However,
so piano is not isomorphic. Is that what you're saying?
it is not, correct. Yeah, because you can't just slide your hand up and keep that same position, And then you can say, well, how about just having a transpose wheel on my keyboard? Well, that's good as long as you make definite changes, And sometimes you want to play a certain scale over different chords and jazz and such. And so ultimately, you want something where you can play those scales. And clearly, piano takes an incredible technique, but it would be nice if you didn't have to do the unnecessary parts. You could just focus on relative pitch. And so in this instrument, or a guitar, for example, keyboard players love to make fun of guitar players because they say, you want to change key, just slide it up, All the notes or all the rows to even fourth intervals, I can play this major triad. I can play it here. I can play it here. Anywhere I want. And so the pitch is relative, and so it makes it easier to focus just on the expression or the composition you're trying to do, and you don't have to learn your composition in 12 different fingerings in order to be able to play with to match the range of a single, for example. So you had a question.
Just quickly, could you go fretless, kind of, to get microtonal?
Well, it's putting out MIDI information. Of course, MIDI just gives you a note number. So what you can do is you can assign those to whoever you want. So you could, for example, if you want to do pure scale or any of those, you could just assign the note numbers to whatever you want, and then your synthesizer interpret those to what you want. But But internally, it doesn't do any sort of thing funny like with the pitch bend. For example, it'll put out 18 notes and give you a certain pitch bend interval to get the places in between. So it is more oriented towards the 12-tone scheme.
Okay.
So to piggyback on that, when you push down, does it only track relative movement from your starting, or can you actually get it so that if you hit off center, you get off the true?
Well, normally the pitch quantization is on, but you can turn it off. And what that means is basically that anytime I hit my first touch within that cell will be dead on, and then any movement after that
Relative.
will be the relative pitch, or like that, right? But you can turn it off, and but I find it, at least with my playing skill, it's difficult to play in tune that way. But some people really, I think Ed Egan actually said at one point that he prefers it with the quantization off. I can't quite remember, but and I'm going to show a video of Ed playing the continuum. He's the creator of the Egan Matrix, which is the synthesizer inside the continuum, and he's. I'll show you this video. He's my favorite violin player, and he doesn't even play violin. So any other questions at this point? Well, why don't, go ahead.
Are you planning on maybe having multiple sizes?
Yeah, actually, a good question. I plan on having a smaller size, which is only 16 columns by 8 rows. And that's the only ones I plan, though. Somebody asked me, somebody wrote in the other day and said, do you plan one that's 8 by 8? And I just like the, for example, the Ableton Push. And I guess the trouble with it is that the stuff inside is relatively expensive to make, and so to make an 8 by 8 one I think it would seem too expensive. So it doesn't make so much sense. The other thing too is that I find if you're playing notes on it, that it's useful to have at least 16 columns there. But the main reason for the 16 columns is I think it's the minimum to be really useful for two-handed play, or even for one-handed play. But also it fits in a backpack. So given the cultural changes, particularly happening in Europe, where nobody has a car and everybody's in a backpack, it's nice to be able to have that. And this one sort of sticks out the top.
Related to that question, how would you determine the optimal dimensions between the various notes and rows and columns on your?
Actually, it came. I got the idea from Peter Davies, who's an Englishman who created this hex layout, a hex key layout called the harmonic table. And he has a bunch of hex keys that are actually physical keys, and his company is called The Shape of Music. And then there's another spin-off of that in England called See-Through Music. They make a hex key keyboard. But Peter determined that the optimal spacing was 19 millimeters, or 3/4 inch, which is the same spacing of a computer keyboard's keys. And so it really allows you to, it's a human interface that's optimized for the human hand. And so I find that it works very, very well. Particularly if you tune to fourths, because you can get any interval from a minor third up to a fifth only by moving up and over plus minus 2 columns. And so I think it's very good spacing for that. But yeah, that basically is 3/4 inches.
It's about the same as the piano key too. The piano key is a little bit less.
No, the piano key is actually wider, but if you actually place your fingers on the piano, you have to spread them apart. Whereas this one is really spaced more for the actual spacing of the fingers than the average human hand. And it seems to work, and everybody seems to like it so far. They seem to think it fits the human hand well. It brings up another point too. It's very nice to be able to design a musical instrument whose human interface is optimized for humans, as opposed for sound generators and acoustic sound generators. And it's one of the big problems in acoustic instruments is that the human interface is always severely, in my opinion, crippled because of the need to make acoustic sound. And a great example is the violin. It's so small to make that high sound, but the string has to be so short that the space between semitones is almost impossible to get in tune. And then it's so small also, the string dies away so quickly that you have to scrape it the whole time with horse's hair. And then, of course, where are you going to hold it? Between your chin and your neck, which is very difficult. But the truth is, as you'll see when I play this wonderful video of Ed Egan playing the continuum, that he makes a beautiful sounding violin, but the interface is optimized for the human body and not for sound generation, the acoustic sound generation. And the same thing, you know, the genie's out of the bottle now. People know that on a synthesizer you can play one interface and get different sounds, albeit not terribly accurate with expression. But you know, people know these days that you know, if you spend 5 years studying to get a good sound on the violin, and then you want to hear a clarinet sound, you got to spend another 5 years playing clarinet, and it's hard to want to put that much effort in when you know that there's an alternate path. But at the same time, there isn't really another alternate path, at least in widespread use yet, and that is the expressive controllers. So, you know, if you're a young musician and you want to learn a musical instrument and you wish to be able to produce that sort of artistic virtuosity and to learn it, your choices are two. You can either, if you want the expression, you go back into the acoustic world and learn an acoustic instrument, and if you want to stay in the digital world with all its conveniences and advantages, then you have to play a MIDI keyboard right now. But that's why we're all trying to change that, is to create another option for people that would like to stay in the digital world or in the electronic world, and to be able to have the option of learning virtuosic performance on that instrument. You know, sometimes DJs, a lot of my DJ friends, they always say they get no respect. Nobody really wants to look at them on the stage. You know, they load their laptop on their face. You know. By the way, sometimes when I do lectures for DJs, I have some fun with them. I say, this is LinnStrument that makes these new things. They're called notes. They're like loops, except they're shorter and they don't repeat. Anyway, somebody else I think had a question. This isn't going to replace any guitar or violin or woodwinds or whatever anytime soon. I think it's a strong step in the right direction. Mm-hmm. I tried to do to do things that help in that direction. There is a feature that's not implemented and working yet, and it's called low row. And by one of these settings, you can change the lowest row into a controller, and you can do things like, if I'm fingering these notes and I want to restrike them, I can just hit the low row again and restrike them. Or if I'm holding a chord, I can strum through the chord here. Or I'm a mandolin player and I like to do trills. So if you hold a note or a couple of notes, then you can trill a note at a pressure, at the repeating velocity set by the pressure pressing the low row. And the speed controlled by the position. So there's a number of things you can do, but in general, I believe that it's important to, well, one of the problems is that if you truly want to make an instrument expressive and polyphonic, the polyphonic part of it necessitates that there be one finger per note. And so the idea is to try and get as much as you can out of the single finger. And so, and that's why the best thing you can do, there are 3 dimensions, at least in this universe, and so I thought I'll grab all of them, you know. So, and it's pretty easy. I think if you look at the expression of a violin or a clarinet or any other expressive acoustic instrument, it comes down to 3 main categories in broad strokes, and that's the loudness of the note, the pitch of the note, and the timbre of the note. You know, for example, if you play violin, you can vary the loudness with the bow, you can vary the pitch, of course, vibrato and glissandi, and then you can vary the timbre by whether you're bowing near the bridge or near the neck. You know, as a guitar player, if you pick near the bridge or by the neck, or if you do other gestures and things. Now, of course, on a guitar, as you well know, you're a guitar player, you know, there's all kinds of things. You can do harmonics, you can mute the bridge, you can, the way you pick it, you can use fingerstyle, or you can pluck strings, or all kinds of things, and clearly that's going to be harder for an electronic instrument to do. And so I think it ends up being, you know, it's certain advantages to one and certain advantages to the other. But I think the question for me is, I don't think I'm going to replace all guitars anytime soon, but I think the question would be is, in 50 years, what are people going to be playing? And I suspect probably that there'll be some new instruments that incorporate maybe a little idea from an instrument, a little bit from harp, a little from continuum, but they do it better, and our culture finds an agreement upon a certain way of doing it for this feature and a certain way for doing this feature, and probably people will be talking about, you know, a certain, whatever the instrument's called, in the same way that we talk about guitar, and they'll be, you know, waxing nostalgic about you know, the early days of 2030 when they had they were better sounding bits in the digital thing, you know.
So have you done a beta with a Chapman stick player?
I'm sorry?
Have you done a beta with a Chapman stick player?
No, I haven't, but it's interesting you say that, because I find You know, at first I thought I would want to hold it kind of like a guitar, but since I had nothing to do with this hand, and this doesn't seem to work quite as well, I suppose it could, but I find that it's most comfortable to hold like this, and so it ends up being something between a guitar and a Chapman stick, and I think it speaks to Emmett Chapman's forethought in playing his own instrument, and he chose to play it in this way. And I think that it makes sense, actually, because you can rest your hands this way. If you're this way, it's a little bit harder. One's underneath, one's on top. Yeah. And I think it actually works this way pretty well, except you look like Bill Wyman.
Sounds cool.
Anyway, any other questions, or should I go on to some of these other cool videos? Because part of the idea is to be able to learn gestures, and as human beings, it takes us a while to learn gestures. And we're not going to learn them with one road tuning and then with another one. We're going to tend to stick with one or the other. So for a guitar player, I like fourths. My wife, the cellist, likes fifths. You know.
The fourth makes sense to me, but I was also wondering of changing into open tuning as you were.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Well, the thing is, there are no open strings on this, so it's.
But the relative.
Yeah, I mean, you could tune them to a chord, and then you'd sort of have that would be an open tuning. But the idea of it doesn't have, of course, open strings like guitar, doesn't even have strings. But this is kind of like the 0 fret, this is the first fret. And one way to think of it is like a keyboard that's laid out like a guitar, as opposed to something that would have all the qualities of a guitar. But it's interesting, I haven't thought too much about that. Maybe there's something there that would be useful, and therefore to be able to have presets for open tunings. And it might work. I mean, you have to call it something else, like non-open, open tuning.